Today is a good day to start talking about, or continue the conversation about American dreaming, or dreams, and maybe American nightmares, I'm not sure. First, I just want to give you a quick, two-sentence, if you haven't already read these books, a two-sentence review of the books, and then talk a little before I have them read. Scott Spencer's book takes place between I have notes, I have to refer to my notes. 1979 to 1990, about a young couple, Grace and Thaddeus. Grace grew up, I think, living off her brother's drug dealing business, and is that true? This is my summary. And Thaddeus was a son of bookish Trotskyites and living in Chicago. And they leave for New York to try to make a go of it as artists. Grace as an illustrator and a painter, and Thaddeus as a writer. And eventually Thaddeus becomes successful, and they buy a big old mansion on the Hudson River, which comes with a couple of already installed local caretakers. And Jonathan Dee's book, The Locals, his book revolves around the town of Howland, Massachusetts, which is somewhere up near Great Barrington. It's a made-up town, he wants you to know. I think it also revolves around the Firths, F-I-R-F-T-H, Firth siblings, three of them, who live in Howland. And they're at odds with each other and with success. I think Mark is one of the siblings. He gets ripped off. Candace gets demoted, and Jerry, the third sibling, gets fired. So those are the quick summaries. Is that good? Yeah. I said this. I think I said it to you on email, but I think you could take either of these books and we could play a game of this later, but you could toss them up in the air and they would land with an open page, and there would be something very meaningful in those pages, funny, meaningful, and talking about the tensions of class disparities, social hierarchies, and how the past, I think, affects our future. I mean, literally, I did this. I just opened a page and I pointed to it. And
just threw?
I didn't throw them, but I could. I maybe at the end of the night. And we could play a game, a drinking game. There's so much richness in these books, not only in storytelling, but just in what's going on in them. That I think you really need to read them to find. It's just every page. I refer to them, I think, as IEDs everywhere, which is maybe inappropriate today, but that's what they are. So before I have Scott read, I wanted to talk a little bit, I want to ask them, I guess, about so Scott's is 1979 to 1990, and John's is from 2001 to 2009-ish? Ish.
Might actually be in 1976.
1976, I will reverse that number, so. They both write in this time frame, this arc of history without being really explicit in their books about the history. And they also write about places that are very, I think, integral to their stories. And I just wanted to ask them what sort of, how it's intrinsic to sort of time and place, or one or the other, whatever you feel like talking about. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first.
Scott will go first.
Well, first of all, that's how I experience life, because I'm living inside of time and I'm living in a place, so that's how reality occurs to me. And since I'm basically a naturalistic writer, I don't go to the trouble of breaking away from that paradigm of just that we live in the moment, that we start to live at a certain point, and we die at a certain point, and we experience our life just in that small amount of time. And where you happen to live also is a tremendous influence on what you can know and what you can experience of the world. The place where I set the majority of River Under the Road is a fictitious upstate town that I've been writing about for a few books. And I just keep on coming back to it and just mining that same scene, because it seems that the more I write about it, the more I understand about it. And it's a a relatively small, almost tiny place, but it serves as a template for a lot of the class divisions that have been are maybe less obvious and more complicated in environments. And so to watch characters move through time in a box that I've created in this town gives me a chance to understand what their choices are and also to illuminate or try to explicate what I think of the way the world works.
I guess I should say, or maybe you should say, but it's a small town in another invented town on the Hudson River. And you're probably familiar with how that works a little bit, maybe somebody. And your town is not in the same place, but similarly situated.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, I'm drawn to writing about class issues, economic disparity, and so I'm drawn to writing, to setting those stories in places where those divisions are unusually close to the surface, which is one reason why I wrote a bunch of novels that are set right here in New York. But the salient thing about Howland, which is, as you say, it's a fictitious town set amidst the real towns in southwestern Mass and in the Berkshires, is that that's for those who don't know it, it's a vacation community, it's a summer community, and there's that dynamic that we're probably all familiar with partly from growing up near there, of a local populace that's dependent on temporary people and their money, and on the one hand resentful of that, and on the other hand fearful that it will go away. And the same dynamic, is in play from the other side, where the people who come and spend the summer there want to, resent being made to feel they don't belong, etc. So that seemed like, if you want to write about, American conflict in general, but particularly in this moment, it just seems like, as they say, you'd be drawn to a place where those conflicts tend to be in play without you really having even to do that much history of them.
Yeah. But you also, but you're writing this time frame that I just want to highlight the time frames because I think they're important to the books. He's writing in the 80s mainly, and you're writing right after his book starts, 9/11 actually.
9/12.
9/12 actually. You're right. It's a 9/12. The aftermath, but it's not about 9/11. But kind of. But I think those time frames are important because they're they feel like precursors a little bit maybe to today of what's going on. One book starts and then there's 10. We were talking about this earlier, but his book ends in 1990, and then the 90s are sort of this 10-year period where things are fomenting in the U.S. And then his book picks up in 2001, where that fomentation sort of moves outward and divides our nation, I think, after that. So just wanted to point that out so that you understand the context. So, but I want to have you read, before we get into too much discussion, I want to have Scott read, I think it's really important to hear their voices and their characters, which are hilarious, by the way.
Okay, I'm going to read almost from the very beginning. I should actually read from the beginning so I don't have to set it up. I'm going to start on page 18. I do have to set it up. We're with Thaddeus and Grace, and they've just left Thaddeus's house where his parents have had a goodbye brunch for him because he's moving to New York. And Grace has been his girlfriend for the past several months while he's been working at his parents' bookshop and just sort of squirreling away money so he can move to New York. And they really haven't discussed whether or not their relationship is going to continue. And she is a basically poor kid who lives in a basement apartment with her mother, where she's always ashamed to have people come there. Thaddeus actually never in their relationship ever steps foot into that apartment. She is hideously ashamed of it. But she works at the Palmer House, and she takes him there. The Palmer House being a sort of pretty fancy hotel near Grand Park in Chicago. The Palmer House, Grace had been working there for 2 years, starting off in housekeeping and more recently behind the desk in her blazer and skirt. She sometimes complained about work because that's what you did, but she was proud of the hotel, proud of its luxury and its history. It had been bought and sold a few times, torn down, rebuilt, renovated, modernized, and through it all, it remained a home away from home for people used to the best things. Presidents who came to Chicago slept in the Palmer House, as did bankers, movie stars, Capone himself, Mark Twain, Sarah Bernhardt. Should I come in? Thaddeus asked her as they approached the gilded entrance with its carvings, its bright windows, its fairyland glow. Definitely, she said. I don't want to get you in trouble. Well, I have family here, she said, as she took Thaddeus's arm and let him in. The traffic hummed behind them. The heat was epic, the noonday sun. Stanley, the oldest of the bellmen, opened the door for them and touched the bill of his braided cap. Grace stood so straight she seemed an inch taller. They were on her turf now. Here I am not liked, she said. Here I am loved. She whisked Thaddeus to the lobby, her lobby, which looked like a room in a sultan's palace, red and gold with inlaid ceilings and soaring arches. There were still dozens of American flags, large and small, scattered through the lobby, left over from the July bicentennial celebration. Where are we going, he asked. Surrender, she said. She led him to the elevators, where the brass doors were finely etched with Art Deco designs. Through the corner of his eyes, he saw the chimera of his sister crossing the lobby. He always looked. He looked a million times. It was a reflex. When he turned back again, the elevator doors opened, and he followed Grace in. The car was carpeted and upholstered and lit with cheerful little lamps. You got us a room? Thaddeus whispered, as the elevator rose with the chains clanking. She linked her finger through his belt loop and yanked him closer. I'm sort of a favorite here, if you must know, you terrible boy, she said. I can do whatever I want. He was still trying to decide if she was beautiful, though it didn't matter. There was something hard about her. She was thin, but not the way models are. A pioneer thinness, the scrap of deprivation. He could imagine her in a gingham dress, in a rocking chair, on a porch, with a shotgun. The room was on the 10th floor, and it was as stately and full of promise as a box from an expensive shop. Everything in it just so. The gleaming bath fixtures, the spotless carpet, the tall mahogany dresser with its double row with brass handles. Room 1030. They would never forget it. With its triple glazed windows and a view of Grant Park and Lake Michigan, where a ceaseless progression of little waves made their way to shore, each one showing its frill of white foam like can-can dancers shaking their petticoats. They fell into the big Palmer House bed. The headboard knocked against the wall, and they had to pull the bed away from the wall by an inch or two, but it turned out not to be enough. The banging continued, and they let it. When they were quiet for a while, Grace pressed herself against them. The tidal smell of sex and the sweat of exertion came off her. Her feelings were too strong to confidently name desire, tenderness, worshipful love, lust. I'm in over my head, he said, whispering to her. It's like I never slept with anyone before, ever in my life. A bar of light, reflected from somewhere unknown, glided across the smooth white ceiling. The music on the radio was Beethoven. Neither of them cared for it. What we have here, she said. Yes, he said. She often paused in the middle of a sentence when they spoke on the phone. Those silences irritated him, but in person they sometimes seemed profound. What we have here is so incredibly beautiful, unexpected. I feel like we have both sleep-wandered into something beyond imagination. I don't know how it happened, what connects us, because as soon as we saw each other, we knew. When I think of all the ways we could have missed each other, I feel such blind terror. I agree, he finally managed to say, a preordained accident. So glad. For a moment his mind was blank. Words were failing him. Grace rolled out of bed and stood there for a moment, enjoying the way Thaddeus looked at her. Would he ever be free of her? A boy who looked at her with such helpless longing? Was he hers forever? Come back to bed, Thaddeus said. I'm going to pee, Grace said. Can I watch you? He had never watched anyone relieve themselves before. He was raised to believe urination and defecation were basically awful things that one had to endure, the body's bad news. The only good news was the mind. Gotta stop there.
Sorry, I was laughing. I feel like I know what's coming. So, Thaddeus and Grace are in this hotel, and you didn't get to the soft, thirsty towels, did you?
No, I did because I started too soon.
No, I'll talk about it though. So he gets to this point, and I've been there. I kind of grew up sort of poor, and you go to a nice hotel for the first time, and everything is lush. You have these beautiful soaps and these soft, thirsty towels that Thaddeus encounters, and he thinks, will I ever have towels like these, you know? And he goes through the whole, you know, and that shampoo and the water pressure and the toilet paper is like folded just so. And it's all this stuff that feels very luxurious to him, and it got me thinking about, you know, what is that sort of what Thaddeus, at least Thaddeus, maybe Grace too, was thinking, thinks that success is? Is that what wealth is? Is that part of the American dream, is to have like folded pieces of toilet paper under the
Yes, it is.
I think it is. I mean, it's a gilded edge.
Yeah, it's you know, it's a trap in a way, but it's like, you know, what the Frank Sinatra called sort of it's a tender trap. It's because it's not only that those towels are luxurious and you feel like you're getting a better towel than the next guy, so you feel great about the towel that you're using, but they're also beautiful. And so a taste for beauty and an appreciation for the nice things in life, for a really well-made suit, for a really brilliant wine, these are aesthetic appreciations, but they can also lead you into a life of complete ruin. Because in order to indulge these tastes, you normally have to do things that are not altogether pleasant. You know, so you're making a trade. You get to have the brilliant bottle of wine, but you have to work in a bank to do it.
Sorry for anybody.
Sometimes I feel like I'm in the room.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I wrote this quote down too. You said, later Thaddeus thinks to himself, since when did wanting a bit of luxury constitute a crime? Wasn't that the whole purpose of this goddamn country? So your character, now to John, his character is a very, very different situation, working class. A lot of them are very working class, except for maybe one or two, which I don't want to get into plot too much. I don't want to ruin it, because I want you to get these books. These people have these sort of aspirations too. I think Mark Firth, he's a general contractor, I guess I could say, or he's a builder. He renovates houses, and he's constantly thinking about, how he can get his next dollar and how he can improve and how he can make more money, so much so that he...
Yeah, he's already really good at what he does, and he makes a nice living at it, but he has a dream of a different kind of life, which, I mean, he wants it, and he also thinks he's supposed to want it, which, if you want to talk American dream, it's sort of true. I mean, if there's one of the foundational elements of that idea is the idea of class mobility, right? To make it sound kind of dry, but the idea that your history, your own paternity, that those things are, fundamentally escapable. And he has that idea about what he's the kind of life he's supposed to want to lead, and he's not really wrong about it. But as you say, it leads to grief for him, more than once. The idea of not being happy where he is, and he says at one point he has a kind of revelation that, like, you're supposed to, as an American, you expect people in the class above you to sort of welcome you into their company, but you expect the people below you to be happy where they are.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. We both have those people really striving in that, and that was what I was going to ask. And we sort of talked about this before, and I don't know if there's an answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. That like the American dream, I think we all know class mobility. There's owning a house, a car, 2 kids, a dog. There's these sort of aspirations that we kind of generally know for Americans, but I try to think about what is the American dream now, and does it exist if we don't have a middle class, which seems to be sort of falling away? I mean, you can see it falling away in both of these books too.
I mean, wasn't it really based on expansion? We started off as 13 colonies, became 48 states, became 50 states, expanded our reach throughout the entire world. Our economy just grew and grew and grew. Jobs, and we had more jobs than we had people to fill them. So we begged people to come to this country to do work, but that reached an end point. And now we're not expanding; we're contracting.
Right.
And not only are we not creating new jobs, but we have created a technology that has done away with jobs. So the American dream might be a 20th century term that's not going to make it through the 21st century.
No, it's already outdated. But the idea that it's coming, the idea that it's due you, is so powerful that now that it's not here, what replaces it is not the idea that it's gone, but the idea that somebody's taken it from you.
That someone's taken it from you, right?
That those rewards should have been there for you, but someone has stolen them.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's technology or things that have displaced people. There's also, the American dream is based on, a lot of it too, I think, may have been based on paying people low wages. I mean, there was, we can't do that anymore. We have OSHA, and we have like laws and environmental laws, and we have all kinds of things that kind of keep people's income up. So we can't really do that anymore. And it sort of plays into both your timelines and your characters too. I think they're both sort of moving, they're trying to move up, but they keep getting a little stuck. I wonder if, I would like you to read, because I want your voice in here too, before we get too crazy.
Sure. Okay, so this book with a lot of characters in it, and as Kerri said, probably the central characters are these the 3 Firth siblings, but the bit I'm going to read now is actually about a different character, who's the first selectman of the town of Howland. That's like a mayor for those of you who grew up in a small town. And his name is Marty Solomon. The first Thursday evening of every month was the town hall open meeting, a proud anchor and vestige of classic New England-style democracy, and a huge fucking pain in the ass of the usually humanity-loving first selectman. It was supposed to be a general forum to discuss in a transparent setting some of the current challenges pertaining to the rather simple government of Howland. The problem was that only the most passionate, committed, crazy people, the ones who had something specific they really, really wanted or did not want, ever bothered to attend, and then they had zero interest in talking or hearing about any grievance other than their own. They all wound up yelling, even when it mostly sounded like they agreed with each other, and then they all wound up irritated with Marty for not resolving everything. They voted him first selectman 3 times now, which was an honor and a responsibility, a full-time one, even if the job itself was only part-time. Still, his role at these town forums was just to listen, and they didn't seem to get that. So these quaint little monthly meetings inevitably turned into a collective failure of patience that sent him straight to the Bushmills bottle pretty much the second he got home, even though the doc had advised him not to eat or drink in the hour right before bed. Doing anything just once a month couldn't be too dangerous, though. Sometimes he fantasized the stress of it actually would give him another heart attack and he'd die in his office, and then everybody would be sorry for how they'd taken everything out on him. And then they could all go to the next town hall open meeting and get into a big fist fight about putting up a memorial to him. Because that's where I should have mentioned that this is March of 2002. Because that's where the January and February monthly forums had ended up, arguing about memorials. And that's surely where this one was going as well. Often the attendance was in the single digits, but tonight it looked closer to 15, and that couldn't be good. Marty sat at a card table between his two fellow select persons, who were flanked by the town's treasurer and its recording secretary. Rows of folding chairs sat facing them. Everyone was too close together. There was a stage behind them, but they never used it. Too imperious, Marty felt. The space on the floor was more democratic, but also more cramped. Of course he sympathized. He knew he was too practical by nature, even in his heart. And if putting up some memorial to 9/11 victims meant they'd have to hope like hell it didn't snow too much next winter because they'd have to cut back on their advanced purchase of road salt reserves, well, they were all adults, his neighbors and friends and customers, a lot of them, and he was their elected instrument, and it was not for him to command them that one consideration should outweigh another, even if no one from Howland or any of the surrounding towns had died that awful day. It was all the posturing that got to him, the wasted time, the passion contests. Right now it was already 8:45 and a couple of the regulars were just starting to hit their stride. Daisy Scoville, who apparently had too little to occupy her now that she turned over the day-to-day of her little cafe to her daughter, wanted to know if they could get an actual piece of one of the towers, a steel shard. She heard of some town in Pennsylvania that had gotten such a relic and built a little park around it. She was fat and wore stretch pants, and he felt guilty for how hard he found it to look straight at her when she was talking. "So can we check into that?" she said. Marty raised his head. "Any idea," he said gamely, "of the associated costs?" Daisy scowled. "I hardly think that's the issue," she said. "Well, all due respect, it's always the issue to some degree. You know, because you were regular at these meetings, that our last assessment, the memorial should go at the school, I think," Daisy pushed forward. "So maybe the county or the state will pick up whatever costs you're so worried about." "The school," Marty repeated. "Where at the school?" "I was thinking between the upper and lower athletic fields." He knew he should just stop there and say something to make her feel validated, something to tide her over until April at least, but he was tired and he couldn't check himself. "You'd like to stick a large shard of steel," he said, "into the ground in the sideline area between the two children's athletic fields." "Obviously not," she said. "There would be part of a fenced-off memorial garden there." Hands shot up. God damn it, Marty thought. God damn it, I will never get home now. I will miss CSI again. I will never be any good at this politics shit, never ever. I don't have it in me to learn. "This is a national tragedy," Daisy was shouting back at the parents who were shouting at her. Her eyes were red. She was rolling now. "It doesn't matter where it happened. It happened here too. Do you just not care that we have enemies who hate us? You think if you forget about them, they'll go away? Please, the athletic fields. You want to raise your kids to get lacrosse scholarships or to believe in something? Either we're a part of this country or we aren't." Marty hated the gavel, but he finally used it. And then, even more brazenly, he proceeded straight to the prayer that had closed every one of these meetings since November. The prayer for the safety of William Nagel, Evie Nagel's only son, who graduated from Howland Regional High 3 years ago, who'd been a junior at Berkshire Community College, and who dropped out to join the Marines. Nobody was going to bicker after Will's name had been invoked. Marty felt bad for using it that way, to shame people into shutting up, but enough was enough. A lot of them had children of their own they ought to get home to. I think I'll stop there.
So before I ask the question I was going to ask, we had a conversation. Has anybody else grown up in New England, been to these town meetings, besides you, Brad?
But I have not been at meetings, but I've heard them.
So Scott has been to them recently, living in Rhinebeck, and we just had a quick discussion about it. It's really important to understand these meetings in the context of the place that this is written in, New England, and how these work. But I just wonder if you could talk about your experience in the New England town meeting.
Well, Rhinebeck's not exactly New England. It's yeah. It's not as yeah. But I was shocked by how verbose and articulate everybody was. I thought that I came there with a point of view that I was going to basically sway them all. I had an vision of them as being completely knocked out by how articulate and precise I was. But in the end, I was actually afraid to open my mouth because everybody who stood up seemed like they'd gone to like the University of Oratory. Or they were so they were just like tenors and doing the great arias one after another, and I was just like, whoa, I think I agree with them all.
Yeah, New England, or I guess New York's not New England, but those town meetings can be something. And so Marty is, well, all the characters I think in John's novel, to me, felt, both novels, I think, felt very tied and sort of orbited around their jobs. And here you see Marty in his job, very deeply in his job. And I just wonder if you could talk about, if you could talk about that a little, if you were conscious of that, or because if I go through every character and I can, it was, their success or their struggles were really sort of involved with their jobs.
Well, yeah. I mean, well, first of all, Marty is actually kind of an outlier in the book in that he's sort of happy with his. I mean, not on this particular night, but it's a part-time job, and the rest of the time he sells heating and cooling systems. And his wife actually broke up with him because he wasn't more ambitious. He's like, I'm good, you know. But all the characters, it's not that much of a stretch to imagine, you know, that their fortunes are tied to their jobs, because you know they don't have. There's not a great safety net for them there. Okay. And as you mentioned, a couple of the Firths, for very different reasons, managed to lose their jobs over the course of the book. And even though they have family around, it's not much help, you know. So their identities and their fortunes are bound up with their jobs, even when they don't like them. Candace doesn't really like her job that much, but it's still a disaster when she loses it. And I think it's you know, like I said, it's not a stretch to imagine a life like that.
Well, it's even interesting with Candace, she's a teacher. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So she was the vice principal and sort of got demoted to be a teacher, or that's how she looked at it.
She was, she was a teacher, promoted to vice principal, then another teacher in this tiny school becomes sick, and they need a replacement, and in the spirit of volunteerism, she goes back to the classroom, and then when she says that she's ready to go back to her old job, she's told her old job doesn't exist anymore.
Right, so even in these even these people that are sort of middling class and they're struggling with, you know, just paycheck to paycheck, there's even these sort of small nuance of sort of social hierarchies, you know, the vice principal.
Well, that's true. And again, it's that little, you know, burr under your saddle, right, of thinking like, well, I'm supposed to want to advance.
I'm supposed to want to advance. Well, yeah. Mark Firth, I don't know if you got to that part, but didn't he say, or not Mark Firth, but Marty, or maybe Mark Firth. He said he had sort of an American image of himself as a man of ambition, someone who wasn't happy unless he was dreaming big, growing, conquering.
Yes, right. And yeah, that's Marty, and then Marty kind of wakes up one day and realizes, like, you know what?
I don't really care.
Yeah, I don't really care. I'm okay where I am. Mark, on the other hand, you know, that's the feeling that he wakes up with every day and never gets past.
He never quite gets past it, as well as maybe Thaddeus, and I don't know. But you're like I said, I feel like your character is really specifically tied to the jobs. Like there's one scene where they're at a party at a friend of Thaddeus's house and at Jean's, right?
Right.
And he's talking about, he says, Thaddeus thought he bought, this is when they buy a house on the Hudson, right?
This is
before.
New York, yeah.
They're still in New York. Thaddeus thinks he bought their way into the society of river people, the select population of property owners along the banks of Layden's share of the Hudson. And then he lists all the people that live there and their jobs. And I just wonder, you know, why did you?
Well, I think that, you know, the job is a class marker, and it becomes a symbol of how much respect you get, how much trust has been put in you, and just, you know, where you are just on the food chain in your moment in time. I mean, I've never actually said this before, but and I'm just remembering how this novel started for me. Because sometimes you forget, because between that moment of inspiration and you're finally getting the book done, so much time passes that you can sort of forget where you began. But it began, and there's not a scene like this in my book. It began as an idea when I was at a well-off person's house who had a beautiful, beautiful place on the Hudson where you couldn't see anything but what you would have seen if you were on the Hudson River in 1700. And he was an older guy, and he had like a stroke, and he was just on the floor, and people called for the EMTs to come and get him to the hospital.
This is during the part. This is while you were there.
Well, this had happened as I was coming there.
Okay.
I just sort of walked into the scene. This man's upstairs. His housekeeper had called. One of the other guests was there, kind of staring at his hands, and then suddenly we're waiting for these people who would never be invited to that house.
Mm.
And we're going to be walking into that house for the first time, who suddenly everyone was depending upon as literally a matter of life and death. And it's sort of that moment stayed with me as just sort of emblematic of how we live now.
What do you mean by that? How we live now? Just how society is?
That there's so little social contact between classes. There's so little overlap in our lives. That we're more ghettoized on a class level than ever before. It seems to me.
Even in a very small town.
Even in a very small
Sometimes,
town.
especially in a
Well, then you can see it so clearly.
Yeah.
Do you think your characters see themselves as victims a little bit? I mean, sometimes they seem like they feel like victims, but they're oblivious of it. But you, as authors, are seeing it. Does that make sense? Like,
I mean, for me, I don't know, the book's got a lot of characters, possibly too many characters. But some of them definitely see themselves that way, but yeah, I wouldn't say all of them.
yeah. I just thinking about the characters, and you may read this in the reviews that, cynical, these words have been bandied about, but I was thinking more in a northeastern sense. I think most of the people in there are generally just kind of grumpy. I'm in that category myself.
Yeah, I prefer the term flinty.
Flinty. but they are also sort of paranoid at times, for sure. I'd say unsatisfied, resentful, and I'm talking both books here, and I'm thinking about certain scenes in them. And I just wonder, do you think that these flinty or grumpy or resentful characteristics are they symptoms of the systemic failures, or are these people products of it? Are they, how did this happen? Why are these people like this in your book? It wasn't just, you just didn't say, I'm going to write a book about a bunch of grumpy people in New England.
Actually, that's
Although I want to preface this too by saying
it's a genre.
It's probably the most accurate rendition of New England that I have ever read, and that's, I think, because of that.
And you're from Maine.
And I'm from Maine, so we are very grumpy there. But no, I just wonder if these sort of problems that all these characters are having, are they symptoms of something going wrong in the system, or are they just characteristics that you give? It feels too calculated to be just random, that they just became resentful, they seem dissatisfied and unhappy. And it doesn't.
Well, I mean, Scott, you were saying earlier that some of the as tied to the time as the events of your book are, that some of the social relations at work there are basically unchanged since the pyramids, right?
Yeah.
And you and I were talking about the Age of Anger, a wonderful book that basically says that every horror that we feel is happening right now, socially and politically in this country, is old news. and goes back to, you know, Voltaire or Rousseau. That's, I mean, we could spend another hour talking about that book. But anyway, I mean, I think like any novel, at least any novel that's got a sort of realist vibe, it's gonna live in both those spaces. You know what I mean? Like I feel like it's very. Like, I really thought about the book as being very much about what happened in this country in the first 10 years or so of this century. But at the same time, it's nothing. It's nothing the world hasn't seen before. So those economic relations, those social relations, are existed before the book. But I think both things are true. I feel like it's about the time, but these things recur.
But if things, I mean, do you think it's so they have existed, and I can think of a million different instances. But is it somewhat different now? It feels like very age of anger. It feels anger and divisive, to me. But how? Why has that changed? Or when did that start? Or how?
I don't know. I mean, for the American working class, probably in the 70s, with the sort of the slow destruction of the labor movement, with the labor movement was essentially smashed, and a whole class became voiceless, and it turned in on itself, and was sort of politically rudderless. The idea of what it means to be successful in our country has really narrowed, and now you feel really not only the pinch of want, but that also the doubt of your own self-worth. If you're not able to have expensive things and live a wonderful, shining life, and what's going to change it? I mean, what answers are being offered up by anyone at this point?
Yeah,
I have an answer.
Please. No, I was just going to say that the reason that I began the locals where I did is not because I honestly, like I often wind up swearing that I'll never do a certain thing and then winding up doing it. And one of them was I'm never going to write any fiction about 9/11,
Right.
because pretty much all the 9/11 fiction I've ever read was terrible. Why would I do that? So of course I did it. But the reason was that it felt like what felt like at the time a moment of extraordinary unity and spiritual renaissance and the death of irony and yada yada, actually in retrospect seems like the beginning of an extraordinary political reaction that's still going on now. The sense that, I felt like there had to be some connection between that and the world of 10 years later, in which the idea of the complete dismantling of the state has just been mainstreamed. The idea of government having any kind of collective role in social mercy is completely something that we were taking for granted not that long earlier. Yeah. Completely undermined. I feel like there's got to be some way we got from there to there. So yeah.
Yeah. You did. I think in both of your books, you got from there to there a little bit. I mean, and now here we are. I think you all read the news, but wait, what time? Am I running over?
It's
Yeah.
a little bit.
A little bit. Okay, I'll try. I have like 3 more pages of questions. I won't ask them.
I was going to say, I'll say this because somebody from Random House is here, and I'll horrify her with this remark.
Do it.
That one of the, talking about the mainstreaming of the idea of the dismantling of the state, and one of the things that I had in mind the whole time was the famous Grover Norquist remark about he didn't want to eliminate the government, he just wanted for it to be small enough to drown in the bathtub. So I really wanted to call the novel The Bathtub, and no one would have thought that was funny to me. I sometimes still privately think of it as cool.
It is funny. I think it's funny.
I'm going to ask you one more question, because I just love this part of the book. There's a party at Jean's. This is where the party is at Jean's early in the book. And Thaddeus is at this party with all these, and this is relevant to New York people, he's at this party with all these new people. He just moved to Chicago and he's meeting all these interesting people. And he says, Thaddeus felt amazed and squashed, almost obliterated by the people in this room, but the destruction struck him as somehow necessary and encouraging. He was being shunned by the right people, by the people who embodied the New York he had long dreamed of, full of ease and privilege and high spirits. And I thought that was a really complicated passage to sort of think about, and how he both abhors it and wants it at the same time.
Right.
I just wonder if you can talk about that in 20 seconds. No. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, he's super ambivalent.
He's super ambivalent. But no,
Yeah, I mean,
I guess
he
that's
he had a dream of New York, and this sort of reminded him of it, because there's, people who wear their privilege lightly and who take for granted all the things that he aspires to, even though, and even as he sort of hates them for it and feels disrespected, he wants to be them.
Speaking of being them, one last thing you should all read too is John's piece in Harper's called "Does the Social Novel Have a Future?" I think you wrote it right before a book came out. You can get it online. It's free. He defines the social novel as one, quote, set in the present and meant to dramatize with an edge of advocacy a real-life economic or radical or political, or racial or political crisis. And he asks one of the big questions in this essay is about, so how then does one make good art about a contemporary social issue about which one feels passionately even while residing among the oppressors? It's like two white men. What? But so in 10 seconds he's going to answer no. It's just it's an interesting point about both of their novels. I think that I think reading the novels they answer the question, but you go into it complicated. But I just wonder how can you write? How can you address social issues while residing in your roles as a privileged class? We won't call you oppressors.
It wasn't the question wasn't as rhetorical as you make it sound, because there's got to be ways to do it. But for me, it was easy in this case because Howland is just about the whitest place that there is, and that actually is, not accidental, but it's fundamental to the crisis that they all go through. And then we talked about this a little bit about the idea that one of the things about living in a small town as opposed to a place like this is that your perceived enemies become much more horrible and threatening by virtue of being invisible. So that a lot of the more, the characters who are more right of center in the locals are very preoccupied with issues that have absolutely no effect on their day-to-day life. And because of that, you can turn them into anything that you want. So that's one way, I guess, to write a social novel while staying in a really hermetic environment dramatically.
Any last words before we?
Well, I don't know that anyone ever even chooses to write a social novel. I mean, any more than you choose to write a novel of manners, these things sort of choose you, and then you do it. You succumb. I mean, I wouldn't know how to do anything else, really.
Yeah.
And Succumb you did. Great books, I recommend. I guess I overshot the time, but does anybody have any questions, please?
Scott, you mentioned that this book is the first of what you conceive of as a trilogy. And I'm wondering how that has affected your writing process and if you have a model in mind.
I don't have a model, and it didn't start off as a trilogy. But at a certain point, I said, if I make this one book, it's going to be 1,400 pages. And I just can't do that. I can't do that to somebody and ask them to read a book that's 1,400 pages.
Thank you.
All the...
But So you have the end in view, even as you're.
I still don't have the end really in view. I can,
But the.
I have the art, I know how far I want to go and I know who I want to go there with. And I'm not entirely sure about everything that's going to happen to them. But I've got my people, I've got my time frame, I've got my setting, I've got my concerns, and then I'll just sort of, see what happens. And I'm about halfway through the second one. Not that much happened.
Anybody else? Yes.
This is specifically to the locals, but I'm very curious about the choice to start with I don't even know if he has a name, the main character at the front,
Yeah.
for the first 40 pages. And I wanted to know, what was the
Let me repeat
decision?
the question. Did you all hear that question?
Yeah, well,
So she's asking, go ahead.
in case there's anyone in the room who hasn't read the whole novel, the opening chapter, which is the first chapter of the book, is labeled Chapter 0, takes place in New York. It begins on 9/12, and it's in the first person voice of an unnamed character.
A great guy.
Yeah, he's a super guy. He's a sort of, if you lived in the city for any length of time, you've seen these guys or know he's just a sort of underground man. And it's that day and those events from his perspective. And you meet Mark Firth in that chapter, but he seems, in the context of that chapter, like a secondary character, but then basically when he leaves town, the book follows him. So
That's so great, though.
It's a really
I liked
cool.
that idea.
I always wanted to just think that because, like in my second favorite novel in the world, which is Power and the Glory,
Yeah.
we start off with this dentist, waiting at the dock for some dental supplies to come in. But this book isn't about him at all. And you just lose him. I just love that idea.
Right, we have a follow-up question. What is your favorite novel?
The locals.
We'll be here all week. So anyway, I liked. Sometimes I get to, I'm struck by and stubbornly stick with these kind of perverse formal ideas. And I like the idea of a book that began not with really it's a prologue only in the most thematic sense. It's more like it's like the stage of a rocket that falls off into the ocean when the rest of it keeps going. And I have to say, one of the things that I had in mind, the model that I had in mind when I was doing it, is the movie 2001. I don't know if you've seen that recently. If you remember the first 6 or 8 minutes of 2001. Which is where the bone turns into a spaceship, right? I was going for something like that, and I never got over being pleased with the idea that it was just a weird way to do things. That was enough for me.
Yeah, I saw it kind of it's like a scab.
Yeah, he's a human scab. Thank you.
Any other questions?
You can always end any panel discussion on the phrase human scab.
It's a great place to end. Anybody else? If not, then I believe, what do I do now?
So now we'll have the writers in the back. You can purchase a book and they'll be signing back there, and there's also refreshments in the back over there as
Excellent.
well. So
Refreshments, books,
enjoy.
signings, you should get these books, they're hilarious.